So thanks for joining, everyone. My name is Anna Surovatka from the WIO Executive Club, and I'm very happy to welcome our speaker, Sabina Brennan, here today. Sabina is a Dublin-based neuroscientist, and she's also best-selling author of the books 100 Days to a Younger Brain and Beating Brain Fog. And she hosts the Superbrain podcast. And she has the talent to make complex issues easy to understand, and her talks are usually very entertaining. And after her talk, we are going to have a questions and answers part. And yeah, that's it from my side. Now I'm leaving the floor to Sabina.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for joining me. I call my podcast Superbrain because I believe that everybody has a superbrain, because you hold inside your head the most complex structure in the known universe. And if you want to maximize its potential and optimize your performance, you really do need to provide your brain with opportunities to work, to rest, and to play. So the human brain, it's built for change, and it actually thrives on challenge. It's flexible, it's adaptable, and it has the capacity to change. And I'm guessing from the audience that I'm speaking to today, the working part is not something that I need to tell you to do. I would imagine we need to focus probably more on the rest and play part and the value of pause. But while we're at it, I do want to say that, working is really important for your brain, because from the age of about 30, your brain starts to shrink, and that's not good, because if you lose brain volume, with that you will also lose brain function. But that's not all bad news. People used to think that decline was just a consequence of aging, but we now know that there are things that you can do to prevent that decline and keep your brain volume up is good. Because bigger is better, really, when it comes to your brain. A well-connected brain is a brain that can perform well and can be resilient to challenge and change, whatever form that may take. So your brain it has an inherent resilience, and this capacity that it has to adapt to change is really what has allowed us as humans to evolve into, I suppose, the rulers of the planet. Although, what we're doing these days with regard to climate, etc., we're not the smartest, but or we're not as smart as perhaps we could be. But really, this ability to adapt to our environment and change and optimize our performance in the context of whatever happens in our environment is what has given us the evolutionary advantage. And so the brain does thrive on challenge, and it has this ability to, I just go back there, it has this ability, as I said, to adapt and change with learning, and that's called neuroplasticity. And if you're engaging in a job that has lots of challenge and involves learning new things, that is an incredibly important thing for your brain. We know that people with low levels of education are at greater risk of developing dementia in later life. And that was a really kind of quite a depressing finding, because particularly when it comes to women and girls around the world, an awful lot don't have access to the same levels of education that males do. But what we have found is, what the research also shows, is engaging in mentally stimulating activities across your lifespan can counteract that loss of education, or those low levels of education. And in the past, and really with our current cohort of women who are experiencing dementia, a lot of those also not only did they not have the opportunity to finish education, they also didn't have the opportunity to stay in the workforce and benefit from the mental stimulation that brings with it. So working is really good for your brain. And I want to talk a little bit about your brain before I go in further to the other things that you can do and to the benefits of pause and balance and play. If I ask you to think of your brain, I'm pretty sure that this is what you think of, and it's really not very pretty. And I mean, I know most organs aren't very pretty to look at, but this one, you know, it belies the magnificence of your brain. It just looks like this crinkly beige static mass, but it only looks like that because it's been preserved in formaldehyde. So if you're thinking about your brain in the future, I'd rather you think of something like this. Now, these are actually neurons, brain cells. They've been dyed using special proteins that dye different types of neurons, different colors. I think they're rather beautiful. They remind me of a Monet painting, and they kind of look like a balloons upside down. So the balloon part are the brain cells, and then the strings of the balloon are the connections. So basically you've got 86 billion neurons and trillions of connections that allow your brain to communicate, allow your brain cells to communicate with each other and with the cells in the rest of your body through electrical and chemical signals. In fact, the main function of brain cells is to transmit information. Your brain really is an information processing machine, and it is an exceptional machine. And I think it's kind of mad that we barely spared a second thought. So I'd rather you think of your brain as this. It's a really, really vibrant, active organ, and we need to treat it with respect, and we need to look after it so that it functions as well as it can. This actually image is from a mouse brain. This is another way that you can get a sense of the dynamic nature of your brain. And this is an image from diffusion tensor imaging, and it gives a little sense of those electrical and chemical signals transmitting information. Another thing I just want to explain to you about your brain, because it kind of helps in understanding how your brain works, what you do, and why you need to do certain things, and understand in a way why you do certain things and maybe why you repeat certain behaviors. So essentially you have three brains from an evolutionary perspective. Now, of course, they're integrated and they speak to each other through those signals that I mentioned earlier, but it helps to understand in a way how they evolved. So the part that I've colored blue or a turquoisey color, that's your brainstem. And any of you who watched any of those programs set in an emergency room like ER or Casualty or whatever, you'll know that if you have a brainstem injury, you're really scuppered or in a bad place unless you have access to a life support machine. And that's because that part of your brain is responsible for things like breathing, your heart rate, your blood pressure, your digestion. It's an unconscious part of your brain. It keeps you alive, and you don't have to think about the activities. You don't have to think about digesting your food. Your brain ensures that that happens. The part of the brain that I have colored pink is the limbic system, and it's also often referred to as the emotional brain because it handles our emotions. It also handles our stress response, our fear response, but importantly, it handles also our learning and memory and our biases. And we have many, many biases, and that's just an inherent aspect of the human brain. It has to operate on heuristics to save energy. So they're just, best guesses or averages that are often very biased in nature. And that part of the brain, again, is unconscious. Then we move to the part of the brain that evolved last, and that is, I've colored it green here, and that's that crinkly beige part that we usually think of when we think of the brain, and that is the neocortex, neo for new, and cortex for outer layer, and it is involved in all of those things that we engage in that make us human, thinking, language, decision making, planning, all those complex activities, risk assessment, all those complex activities that we engage in. And the front part of that brain, of your brain, the frontal lobes, was the last to evolve, and it's like a master controller, an executive controller, and it is linked to It's really, really well connected. It is linked to all the various other areas of your brain bidirectionally, and it has the capacity to see big picture and help you in risk assessment and decision making, etc., and perhaps to override some of those unthinking biases, for example, that I mentioned. So your brain absolutely loves patterns. Sorry, I just want to check something. Yeah, no, sorry, I'm just seeing a message on my screen. I wanted to make sure you weren't seeing it also. Your brain absolutely loves patterns. And that's because your brain is a really high energy organ. It only weighs about 2% of your body, but it consumes about 25% of the nutrients and oxygen that are circulating through your bloodstream at any point in time. So it's a high energy organ. And the green part, the neocortex, consumes the most calories and energies to engage in those functions. So those higher order human functions are very resource heavy. And so your brain is constantly looking for patterns that it can automate, so that it can make efficient use of the available resources. Now, it automates those patterns, removing responsibility for engaging in those behaviors to the pink part of the brain, the unthinking part of the brain, and they become and are what we generally refer to as habits. So, for example, your brain is scanning for things that you do regularly in a particular order. So, like maybe your alarm goes off, you reach out your hand, you press, snooze or whatever, or you get up, you have a shower, you pee, you brush your teeth, you have your breakfast, you get dressed, you go to work. And once you do that in a regular order, in a regular fashion, your brain goes, yes, I can automate that so that I don't have to think about what I do next and waste unnecessary, energy and calories on that sort of thing. So basically, once it sees a routine behavior, it passes responsibility over to a part of your brain called the basal ganglia, which is unconscious, unthinking, and habitual. Now, I want to speak very briefly about COVID and the pandemic and lockdown, and why so many people said it to me. I'd be curious to hear afterwards whether a lot of this was true for a lot of you also. But despite the fact that during lockdown, a lot of us were doing less in that, we weren't entertaining people, we weren't socializing, we weren't engaging in activities outside of work. And yet, despite that, a lot of people found that they were less productive at work. They couldn't solve problems the way they used to. They were less efficient maybe in their work. They just felt overwhelmed and overloaded. And one of the reasons that occurred is that if you think back to, certainly in Ireland, it was March 2020, we were just suddenly all told to work at home and figure out how to do so. So your brain your thinking brain had the added responsibility of figuring out how to work from home. So that's an additional task that it had taken on. For many, they had to figure out how to homeschool as well. And then in parallel to that, what also happened was all of our routines were disrupted. So your brain had to think about, well, when do I get up? When do I get dressed? When will I have my breakfast? And a lot of people fell into very different random behavior. Maybe sleeping on a little longer because they didn't have to commute, maybe working in their PJs and only deciding to get dressed when there was a Zoom meeting, or maybe sharing responsibilities for homeschooling with a partner. So maybe doing homeschooling at 10 a.m. on a Monday and at 3 p.m. on a Tuesday. And basically that meant that your brain couldn't see any patterns to automate. So it lost the freedom of the habitual routines you had pre-COVID, and then couldn't find any other routines to replace those with. So your brain was overloaded just making those very fundamental basic decisions about when will I get up, when will I get dressed, when am I going to homeschool, when am I going to do these various things. Unfortunately as well, your brain doesn't distinguish between whether a habit is good or bad. And so for a lot of people then what happened was, in the early stages, because people were seeking comfort in the evening time from a glass of wine or from chocolate or whatever. And that sort of became a regular thing, and the brain zoomed in on it and said, there's a habitual behavior I can automate. And so a lot of us found ourselves just automatically reaching for alcohol in the evening or junk foods that we ordinarily would have done. So the thing is, thinking about a behavior is resource heavy. Patterns and habits are less effortful. So, you know, we hear a lot of talk about people saying we live too much of our lives on autopilot, and that is probably true, but we have to live some of our lives on autopilot if we want to maximize and use our brain resources for those more complex activities that you probably engage in as part of your day-to-day job. So if you're still working from home or doing hybrid, etc., try and introduce as many routines as possible wherever you can to relieve your brain from the pressure of having to figure out what to do. So I think I've actually I've covered what I have on this slide already, except for one thing to bear in mind, that habits never extinguish completely. So even if you learn to override an unhealthy or unhelpful habit with a new healthy one, the old habit will always be there. And that makes sense because, you know, if you recall learning how to tie your shoelaces as a child, it was a very cognitively demanding task. And then eventually you learn how to do it. It's automated and it's habitual. You don't have to think about it. Then imagine, or well, you don't even have to imagine, maybe during lockdown, you never wore shoes you had to tie a shoelace for. And then you come back to work and you need to tie your shoelaces. It would make no sense to have to relearn that task. So you can just, you know, resurface that habit. So the thing to remember about those old habits that maybe are unhealthy and unhelpful, that perhaps a lot of us saw re-emerging during the pandemic, is that that kind of behavior is more likely to re-emerge when we are deprived of sleep or experiencing chronic stress. So yeah, so reintroduce those routines, particularly if you are remote working. I suggest to people that if you are remote working, it's a good idea to create a fake commute, even if it's just to mark the beginning and end of your day, take a walk around the block if you are working at home, just to sort of compartmentalize. Lunch is absolutely critical. Your brain needs a break. It needs to refuel. Often we feel, and I find myself doing that as well, we feel let's work through lunch, will achieve more, but actually you don't. It's counterproductive. Your brain needs that break. It needs you to take that pause so that you have the energy and the resources to work in the afternoon. Exercise is brilliant for your brain, and what the research shows is that exercise at lunchtime is one of the best ways to counteract that natural dip in alertness that we all experience in the afternoon. And what the research shows is that if you exercise at lunchtime, in the afternoon, your attention will be improved, your ability to learn new information will be improved. So really be disciplined about taking that pause and taking that break at lunchtime. It's also really important to set yourself boundaries. If you are working from home, try to make work a place rather than a thing. Even prior to the pandemic, we had started to make, you know, work had started to evolve into a thing, you know, as in a thing that's always with you, emails in your head, constantly contactable. Whereas when I started working, you know, there was no mobile phones, there was no email, and nobody could contact you. Nobody would dream of telephoning your home to ask you a question outside of work time. You know, work happened Monday to Friday, 9 to 5:30, and that was it. And you know what, there's a lot to be said for that, particularly in terms of managing stress. And then socializing is absolutely critical, and it really is important to take time, even if it's at work as well, to pause, to talk to other people, to socialize with other people. And if you're are working remotely and your teams are working remotely, try and offer them opportunities for those naturally occurring water cooler moments, opportunities where they can socialize and engage with colleagues other than just at meetings. That's really important for your brain health, for your mental health, but it's often from those casual encounters that insights and ideas can come, you know, that can benefit work. I want to talk very briefly about brain fog. I don't know about you. My brain is quite foggy at the moment because I'm feeling under the weather. Brain fog has been reported as a quite debilitating symptom of long COVID, but also a lot of people are experiencing brain fog just as a consequence of the pandemic itself, the measures that have been put in place and the constant stress that we have been under. And so I thought I'd take a little moment to just explain the symptoms and what brain fog is, and give a little bit of clarity on that, and some tips then on how to maximize your performance, even if you have brain fog, or how to eliminate brain fog. So brain fog really is just an umbrella term that's used to describe a collection of symptoms, a feeling of overwhelm, just everything is too much, and so you can't think straight, feeling of mental fatigue, struggling to pay attention, to stay focused on what you're doing, but also to sustain attention. So finding your mind wandering when you're even trying to read a document, or also attending to the thing you want to attend to the exclusion of noises around you. So real problems with attention. Also a general slowing, in that it feels like it's taking you longer to take in information, make sense of it, and then formulate a response. Problems with decisions. Now we tend to think when we talk about decisions, we think of those bigger decisions. So yes, brain fog will impact on your capacity to make decisions, but also can leave you floored even at the simplest of things, like opening the fridge to decide, what am I going to have for dinner? What am I going to wear today? Just really, because they're all activities that are carried out by your frontal lobes, and they require a lot of effort. Problems learning new things. I'm not just talking about academic information, but even learning how to use a new remote control or a washing machine or anything like that. Memory, becoming much more forgetful than you ever were, finding yourself maybe missing a couple of meetings, or forgetting what you agreed to do for a meeting. Language issues. A lot of people with brain fog find it very difficult to find the right words. Certainly for myself, when I've experienced it, like I feel like I'm playing a constant game of charades, trying to get the word out. But also on top of that, a sense that your language is not as rich or as fluid as it ordinarily would be. And then one thing that some people are surprised about being, a brain fog thing, and that's what most people would call clumsiness. So it's actually problems with spatial navigation, finding yourself bumping into things or dropping things. And that is also a symptom of brain fog. And you can see from those that, if you have more than one of them, it can be quite debilitating, really impact on your ability to function at your optimal levels. Now, all of those things singularly are things that we've all experienced. If you've ever had jet lag, you'll have experienced a few of those, or if you've had a few nights in a row without sleep, you'll get that brain fog feeling. But the difference with brain fog as a phenomenon is that it is persistent, that the symptoms occur regularly, and that they interfere with your ability to carry out your work, interfere with your relationships and your quality of life. So to explain what brain fog is, I'll really just say what it isn't. It's not a disease, it's not a disorder, and it's not a diagnosis in and of itself, but it is very real and it does exist. Really, it's a warning. It's a signal to take action. It's a warning that something is amiss, because essentially your brain is malfunctioning. It's not carrying out the activities that it can normally carry out with ease. So there's something amiss. And really the way to combat brain fog is to identify what it is that is amiss. Now, for a lot of people, it's multiple factors combined that bring about the brain fog. And particularly that is often the case for women, and you'll see why in a minute. So the main causes for brain fog, it can be caused by an underlying health condition. And a lot of those health conditions are health conditions that disproportionately affect women. So autoimmune diseases, some chronic pain conditions, migraine, another condition that disproportionately affects women, depression, anxiety, certain cancers, they themselves can all bring about brain fog. Also, it's quite common for brain fog to occur after a viral illness or while you're ill. You know that if you're ill and under the weather, you really can't, like, I'm feeling unwell and I thought, oh, you know what, maybe I'll use the time to catch up and read some books and stuff. I can't focus, I can't concentrate, I can't read beyond a few lines. And that's because my brain and my body are focused on fighting the infection that I have. Unfortunately, brain fog is also often a side effect of the medications that are used to treat those conditions. You'll probably have heard of chemo brain, which is the brain fog caused by chemotherapy. Many autoimmune medications can give rise to brain fog as well, and many over-the-counter medications. So painkillers, analgesics, antihistamines, anti-nausea tablets, they can all give rise to brain fog. Essentially, any medication that works on the central nervous system, and a lot of them do, have the capacity to either give rise to brain fog or exacerbate it, or be the thing that pushes you over that threshold. Never stop a medication that has been prescribed to you by your doctor without first talking to the prescribing doctor. They may well be able to prescribe an alternative that won't give you those symptoms. Brain fog is also associated with disruptions or imbalance in hormones, and that can affect both men and women, but it does affect women much more so. And you will frequently experience brain fog right across your lifespan as a woman. PMT, for me, I knew my period was coming because I became clumsy before it. I'd bump into things, and I'm not a clumsy person. So that was one of my brain fog symptoms then. During pregnancy, you've heard of pregnancy brain, you've heard of baby brain, menopause brain. One of the key reasons I wrote my book was for women going through the menopause, because I felt that given their age, an awful lot of them may be concerned that they are getting dementia and that they're early signs of dementia, and they're not. Dementia is very distinct from brain fog, and brain fog is reversible. You need to just, find out what the contributing factors are and address those. People are often surprised. We tend to think of sex hormones like estrogen as being associated with reproductive activities, but you have estrogen receptors throughout your brain, and you actually have them in the hippocampus, which is a structure in the pink part of your brain that's actually responsible for learning and memory. So when you think that if you have a drop in estrogen, that makes sense that it might impact on your capacity for learning and memory. And then brain fog can be caused by a dietary or nutritional deficiency. For example, vitamin B12 deficiency. The brain fog actually can be so severe that it can be mistaken for a dementia because it can have such an impact on brain function. But even things like anemia, folate deficiency, omega-3 deficiency can impact on your cognitive function and give brain fog symptoms. And then there are lifestyle factors, which are mainly exercising your body, exercising your brain, diet I've kind of referred to, but sleep and managing stress. And that's really what I'm going to focus on for the rest of this talk, and to give you some tips. I think anybody who's maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm being biased, but certainly as a woman, I always feel that I have to work harder and longer, and to show I shouldn't, and I know I shouldn't, etc. But I think we kind of do, and I think often we tend to push ourselves, and men do too. I'm not saying it that way, but I do just think that we can often sacrifice sleep and allow ourselves to become chronically stressed and accept that as an okay way to live, and it's not, because it has long-term impact on your brain function. So you'd serve yourself better valuing sleep and making sure you just have optimal levels of stress. So there's a good chance that more than half of you tuning in today are actually sleep deprived. It's a global issue. It affects multiple age groups. It affects men and women. Way before the pandemic, the World Health Organization declared a sleep loss epidemic, with 1 in 3 people not getting sufficient sleep. And, that has upped over the pandemic. Most people have found disruption to their sleep, and there's been an increase in the prescribing or the request for prescriptions of sleeping tablets, which I'm not an advocate of. So poorly managed chronic stress and stress and sleep are they're just inextricably linked. They really are. You've got to kind of work on the two together. So the more stress you have in your life, the less sleep you'll have, and the less sleep you'll have, the more stress you will become, because inefficient sleep at night actually boosts those stress hormones, because the brain chemicals in deep sleep, they release a signal to stop the release of those stress hormones. So if you're not getting sleep, the body keeps pumping those stress hormones, and as a result, you'll be exhausted, fatigued, you'll be irritable, you'll get brain fog. And when you're feeling like that, it's really hard to focus and problem solve and maintain relationships, and all of that on top of each other leads to more stress. Now, oops. Oh, I'll have to pop over there. I have a slide in the wrong place. I'll come in between it. Excuse me. The degree to which stress impacts on sleep is not the same for everyone. I can attest to that in my family. Myself and my husband respond very, very differently. So the term sleep reactivity refers to the degree to which, it really refers to like a trait-like degree to which stress disrupts sleep. So someone with high sleep reactivity, like me, we experience drastic disturbances to our sleep if we have chronic stress. Someone with low sleep reactivity, like my husband, can sleep like a baby, no matter what sort of stress is going on in their lives. Whether you have high or low sleep reactivity depends on a number of factors. There is a genetic element. Being female means that you are more likely to have high sleep reactivity. There's certain environmental factors, and also if there is a family history of insomnia, you're more likely to have high sleep reactivity, and unfortunately you are then more likely to go on to develop insomnia yourself. So sleep procrastination, I mean, the thing is, when I've given talks prior to the pandemic, I sort of said, oh, we have a sleep loss epidemic, but like, we don't need any vaccine to cure this. We're just doing this to ourselves under our own volition. We're staying up late at night to watch stupid programs on Netflix, in the name of relaxing or me time. Why are we doing that? We need to question that. I think some of it is related to perhaps that we are overloaded, or we take on too much as women, and we have a lot of roles where we're working during the day, and then maybe we're looking after children, and we are then, putting them to bed, and we see that time as me time. And so we stay up later and longer. And I would suggest you need to reframe that and see going to bed as me time, time for me to restore, build up my resources, my energy level, my capacity. I think there's another way to do that. You can also reward yourself with that me time of, going up to your bedroom an hour before bedtime and doing nice things like having a bath, or putting creams on, or reading a book, just to unwind. And also, I think, it's important to make sure that that me time isn't the last thing on the list. It isn't the thing that occurs late at night. You can do that by making a me time during the day. Even if it's to make your lunchtime your me time, or, the morning time, carve out some time during the day for me time. And then in the evening time, go to bed as, at a regular time. Excuse me. Why do we procrastinate? Well, people who are impulsive are more likely to procrastinate about going to sleep. The thing is then, though, if you have a lack of sleep, you are more likely to become impulsive and engage in impulsive behaviors. So the more impulsive you become, the less sleep, the less sleep you're likely to get, because you're going to procrastinate about going to bed. I think it's really important to kind of reframe how we feel about staying up and how we feel about sleep. Sleep is the thing that needs to be cherished, and it's critical. It's critical for memory and learning, for insight and ideas, and also for eliminating toxins. Yeah, I'll just go back and talk about each of those briefly. When you go to bed at night and when you go to sleep, your brain doesn't sleep. It has a job of work to do, a very, very important job to do. So during the day, when you take in information, it is sort of temporarily stored in the hippocampus, in the pink part of your brain. Now, the hippocampus is tiny, and it does an amazing job for the size of the structure, but it has a limited capacity. So there's only so much information it can take in. And you'll often get that sense if you've been working all day and then it's late and someone starts to talk to you about something and you say, no, I can't take any more in. I'm full. My brain is full, and you need to go to sleep. And it's true, your hippocampus gets full, and it needs sleep to clear out that information so that it's free to take in new information the next day. So when we see in the early part of the night, when we're asleep, we see electrical activity between the hippocampus in the pink part of the brain and your frontal lobes. And when I say we, I'm talking about neuroscientists in general, globally, that what we think is happening is that your frontal lobes are making decisions about the information that was taken in during the day. It's filtering that information you can dump, or information that you need to keep and store. A little later in the evening, we see a change in that electrical activity, and it becomes much more diffuse across different areas of the brain. And that is that new information being embedded in various areas of your brain as new memories, starting to be consolidated as memories. In the later part of the night, what I would generally call early morning, when you have more dream sleep, REM sleep, the activity we see is the new information being integrated with your existing memories, your existing knowledge, your existing experiences, and embedded together. And your brain then is melding that together and coming up with insight, ideas, solutions to problems. So if you're working and struggling with a problem, or you're looking for insight, or you feel you've lost your creativity and you're tempted to just burn the candle, throughout the night to try and solve the problem, you're really doing it all wrong. Your brain has the capacity to do that while you're asleep. So we give far too much credit to the part of our brain that we are conscious of, the bit that we think is me. Your brain processes billions of bits of information, and only 30 to 40 of those bits are consciously processed. Your brain has access to all the rest. So put the information in, all the relevant information into your brain, finish your day's work, take a break, take a rest, do relaxing things, go to sleep at night. Your brain will start to figure out the problem for you. It really does. It mightn't happen overnight, but it certainly will happen over time. Another really important task that happens when you're asleep at night, I like to think of it about, the cleaning trucks going around a city at night on the empty streets. So as I mentioned earlier, your brain is a high energy organ, and therefore it produces a lot of metabolic waste. Now, metabolic waste from your other organs is processed through your limbic system during the day, but your brain doesn't have the capacity to process that waste and be you and function as you. So it needs you to go to sleep so that it can eliminate those toxins from your body. If you're not going to go to sleep, some of those toxins will remain, and that accounts for why you might wake up feeling really groggy, etc. You have toxins in your brain that should have been eliminated during the night. And that's really important in the longer term, because some of those toxins are beta amyloid, which are implicated in Alzheimer's disease. So you need to sleep so that your brain can do a deep clean. The best ways to cherish sleep sleep is to have a regular schedule, irrespective of whether it's weekends or not. Go to bed and get up at the same time every day. Your brain thrives on regularity, and that's the optimal way that it can perform. And that just doesn't apply to sleep. Eat regularly, exercise regularly, so that your brain knows when it's going to get the nutrients and the rest, etc., that it needs. The quality of your sleep matters, and that's because of the different activities that happen during the night. Exposure to light is a great way to manage sleep. If you're having difficulty with sleep, there's a lot of factors have to kind of come together to help induce sleep. So light is one of those things. So basically expose yourself to light, white light, first thing in the morning. So open your curtains or blinds. If you're in a country where in the wintertime it's dark, turn on a white light, but don't open your laptop, not a blue light, a white light. Throughout the day, try and get at least 30 minutes, if you can, an hour in daylight. Your brain needs to get that signal. There's a part in your brain called the SNC, and it needs to get daylight to help set the sleep cycle. So try and get outside in that daylight. In the evening time, electricity is only around a very short period of time in the evolution of the human species, and it confuses the brain still, as does blue light. So I suggest in the evening time, from about 8 o'clock, start to dim your lights, turn off overhead lights, create an atmosphere as if light is starting to fade. Shut down those laptops, screens, TVs, etc., at least an hour before bedtime. I mean, it's really important to start to develop a wind down routine. If you have kids, you don't expect them to go from running around playing games and then say, into bed, go sleep, because they're wound up, and the same applies to you. You need to gradually wind down to kind of get into a sleep mode. And the research shows, a lot of us say, oh, I'm so exhausted, I'm going to go home and I'm going to watch Netflix and chill out and relax. And actually the research shows just 2 hours watching, a film or a movie actually increases anxiety levels rather than reducing them. Of course, that depends on what you're watching. But for the most part, if you're watching an action drama or murder or even a romance, there's tension in it by definition. So that's going to raise your anxiety levels. Temperature is something that people aren't always aware of. And that is that temperature needs to be reduced by your core body temperature by 1 degree, so that you can get into a sleep mode. So don't be turning the heat on or hot blankets before you go to bed. In fact, you should be trying to make your room a cool room. Having a hot bath counterintuitively will reduce your core temperature, because as you step out of that bath, you'll see the blood rushing to your core to cope with to your extremities to cope with the change in temperature. And so by doing so, it's actually reducing your core temperature. Try and make your bedroom a haven only for sleep and for sex, for relaxing. If you have to work at home, try and work anywhere you can other than your bedroom. If it has to be your bedroom, then take anything to do with work out of your bedroom during the night, or get a screen to cover it up, etc. Avoid things like caffeine, alcohol, and eating late or exercising late at night, and then manage stress, which I'm going to finish up on. And it sounds easier said than done. What I do want to say is there is nothing wrong with stress. Optimal amounts of stress are absolutely brilliant for your brain. As I said earlier, in terms of work and the jobs that you do, the stress that brings in, if it's at the right level, that allows your brain to learn and to surmount challenge. And, it's motivating and it makes life worthwhile. It's just, you have to kind of find your own sweet stress spot. Where stress becomes problematic is when it becomes chronic, and that impacts on the structure and the functioning of your brain. And a lot of us have been chronically stressed since the pandemic began, and we need to start to find ways to manage that stress if we don't already do so, because it impacts on your ability to learn, to remember, and to concentrate. And it also sets the stage for depression and anxiety. So what is stress? And I think it's quite confusing because we use the word stress interchangeably to describe the stressor, the thing that is stressing us out, the threat. But we also use stress to describe the neurophysiological response. So the release of adrenaline and cortisol, and your heart pounding, and your sweat rising, and your breathing accelerating. And also we use it to describe the psychological response to stress. So that all gets a little bit kind of confusing. But the thing about psychological stress response is it's all about perception. It is about when we perceive that the demands placed on us exceed our ability to cope. And it doesn't matter whether that is real or imagined, it will kick off the stress response that, if that becomes chronic, causes damage to the hippocampus, that very vital part of your brain. So it really is important to manage the stress, and we can do that by changing our perceptions. So it's very individual. I also want to say that too little stress is not good for your brain either. It leads to boredom, depression, and your brain cannot afford to waste energy on brain cells that aren't being used. And so by a process called apoptosis, it will prune away those brain cells and your brain will shrink. So it really is important to find that stress sweet spot. I want to very briefly talk you through, because I'm conscious of time, I want to very briefly talk you through what happens with the stress response, to just explain how it can impact on how our brain functions and the structure of our brain. So when you have an acute stress response, so say you hear a loud bang and you're walking along the street, that information, that threat, that information, that noise, that sensory information is sent to your brain via two routes, a fast route and a slow route. So the fast route goes directly to your amygdala, which is in the pink part of your brain, and it is responsible for the fear response, okay? And that will allow you jump back out of the way if it's a passing car, or jump down if it's gun firing, okay? It's just that immediate unthinking response, because that pink part of the brain is unthinking. The same information eventually gets to the amygdala as well, but it goes via the frontal lobes, okay? So it's a slower response. The same information, that loud bang, goes into your frontal lobes. And if you recall from earlier, I explained that your frontal lobes are the most well-connected part of your brain. They have access to the big picture. They can give a slower, more reflective response to the situation. They can ascertain whether that loud noise was just a car backfiring and send a message to the amygdala that says, false alarm, shut down that stress response, or, oh my God, it is a gunman. Let's ramp up the stress response and deal with this acute threat. Okay. Now, what happens if stress becomes chronic is the ability to shut down the stress response becomes impaired and faulty. Okay. And basically what happens is, instead of your frontal lobes overriding your amygdala, your fear center, the reverse starts to happen. It's basically neuroplasticity, which is the ability of your brain to change with learning and grow new connections, is suppressed in your frontal lobes, and it is suppressed in your hippocampus. It is increased in parallel in your amygdala. So essentially your fear center becomes stronger, and your thinking reflective part of your brain and the part of your brain involved in learning become weaker. And so you move from reflective to reflexive thinking, acting, behavior. Essentially you become on high alert and you just engage in unthinking behaviors, which really on an ongoing basis isn't good. So to manage stress, physical activity is just one of the best ways to look after stress. It's also brilliant for promoting sleep. Be connected, seek social support wherever you can, sooner rather than better. Offloading a problem, saying it out loud can actually really just dissipate it. Be realistic about what you can achieve. Often we're unrealistic about what we can achieve, but also realistic about what others can achieve. Often that can become a source of stress. We're asking too much of ourselves or for others. Be practical about things, make lists, notes, all those kind of things. Be present in the moment, be positive about what you can achieve. You know, optimists actually do perform better. They manage stress better, and optimism can be learned. And be balanced in your life. And that really is about balancing, you know, that pause with the work, with the sleep, etc. The power of pause is scientifically, you know, underpinned with data. You know, get offline, spend time in nature. It is genuinely restorative. Break your day with exercise. As I mentioned, it'll help you to think better, learn easier, and remember more. Relax. Now, I know, and someone used to say to me, I had a brother used to always say to me, relax, and it used to want to make me scream. You know, I always thought about relaxing as sitting, doing nothing, or meditating, and I'm not very good at doing that. It doesn't have to be that. If you can do that, that's great. That will work. Absolutely tons of evidence around meditation and the benefits for the brain. But relaxing can just be finding your joy, losing yourself in an activity that you just love doing. Just think of an activity that you can engage in where you don't notice the passage of time. If it's been a long time since you allowed yourself have fun and joy, or lose yourself in that way, think back to when you were a child. What was it that you would do where your mother would say, I've just been calling you 3 times and you didn't hear me? Or that you forget to eat. I'm not encouraging forgetting to eat, but, you know, just losing yourself in something that you enjoy really is a great way to relax. And being present in the moment is a great way to keep anxiety and depression at bay. My final tip is to smile. It's my favorite stress buster. Laughter actually is nature's natural stress buster. It actually lowers cortisol levels. Smiling lowers your blood pressure, it boosts your immune function, it releases feel-good hormones like serotonin. It's got so many health benefits. A lot of people during the pandemic, I think, have forgotten to smile. They tend to see smiling as something reactive. I have to have something to smile about, or a person to smile with, but that's not true. You can smile wherever, whenever you want, and get all those benefits, health benefits. The researchers did that by just getting people to bite on a pencil, and that used to kind of, you know, perplex me. Why, if we have inside our head the most complex structure in the known universe, can it be fooled by a synthetic smile? And then I realized actually it's because it's so clever. It's given us this really simple tool to mitigate stress and boost our mood, and, you know, protect ourselves, our immune function, etc. So create a laughter stash, a smile stash, you know, file on your computer, whether it's memes or funny cat videos or laughing baby videos. And instead of waiting till you're stressed, if you feel anxiety or panic rising, go to that for 5 minutes, laugh. It'll help kind of break that cycle. So I prescribe smiling 5 times a day, once first thing in the morning, because it's a brilliant way to start the day, once last thing at night, because it's great to end on a positive note. Share at least one smile with somebody else, because it makes sure you're being social and you spread the health benefits, and you can do whatever you want with the other 2 smiles. Thanks so much for listening. Sorry, I've gone a little bit over. I can share on social media the various things that you can do more generally to keep your brain healthy and to beat brain fog. But if you look after stress and sleep, you're really on to a good thing. That's my podcast. If you like this kind of stuff that I talk about, and I've lots of interesting guests and lots of free resources if you want to use them, lots of animations that explain scientific concepts like neuroplasticity, and that's my latest book. Thank you so much for listening. I'm sorry I've gone over, but really happy to take questions.
Thank you, Sabina. We really loved your inspiring talk, full of energy. It was very interesting. We had a question in the chat. I think it was Alex. Do you want to say it, or shall I read it?
Sorry.
No, maybe. Yeah. Okay, but if someone else wants to step in and have a question, go ahead. You can ask. No, it was Marco. Sorry. No, not Marco. No. Yeah, it was Alex.
Yeah,
Yes?
I see a question here. Do you want me to answer it?
Yeah, how our brain responds.
Our brain respond to long COVID. Why great resignation happens if our brain is powerful enough to deal with prevalent crisis trauma, etc. Okay, there's kind of two questions in there. So brain fog is a very common symptom after many viral infections. So prior to long COVID, it's common after sepsis, it's common after, anything that has really been life-threatening or a serious threat. Nobody's entirely sure why. It makes sense that it is most probably a resource issue at this point in time. Remembering where you put your keys or how to do long division is irrelevant if your brain is trying to keep you alive. So there is that priority of keeping you alive. There's possibilities as well around kind of autoimmune or immune responses interfering with issues. There's I think the main take-home message around long COVID and brain fog is that not to worry and be concerned that it is long-term, that you can gradually build up. It's like if you think about with your body with long COVID, if you used to run 10K before you had COVID and now you can barely walk to your bedroom door, you're not going to expect to be able to run 10K tomorrow. You know that you've lost condition, that you actually have to work very, very slowly to regain that. And, so I've spoken to neurologists about this, basically, start walking 10 meters for a week, then maybe 15 meters and so on. And the same sort of applies with brain fog. For example, if you're having struggling to read more than a sentence, just work on reading a sentence for a week and then build up to a paragraph, etc. Just take it very gently. But I have lots of tips. I have an entire chapter in my book actually of things that you can do while you're living with brain fog to minimize your symptoms. Very simple things. For example, if you're having problems with attention, remove distractors out of your room. Lots of paintings on walls or books or clutter in the room. They're competing, with your thinking for resources. Also turn off radio, turn off television, remove distractors, and that will help you focus on something. If you think in terms of resources and what's available, and also not pushing yourself too far. If you're struggling to sleep at night, consider taking a nap in the early afternoon, and that can be beneficial. But yeah, it will take time. And the good news is, prior to publishing my book, I got some people with various conditions, including people with long COVID, to take the 30-day plan. And I was blown away because, obviously, before I wrote the book, long COVID didn't even exist. But we had great results with long COVID. One girl going even from being barely able to walk to by week 3 actually taking yoga classes, and had managed a lot of that put down to managing her sleep and focusing on improving that. You kind of ask why resignation happens in our brain if our brain is powerful enough to deal with prevalent crisis trauma, etc. It depends. Our brain adapts to challenge, but there's two types of challenge: one you can do something about and one that you can't. So whether you name something resignation or acceptance, so certainly over the last 18 months there's challenges that we can do something about, but there's others that we simply have to accept. And I've watched people build up stress, bucking against things like wearing masks, etc. Accept some of those battles that you can't win, and kind of work with those. I think trauma and crisis and the stress response are very complex. I'm talking here in very much in an overview, but how your stress response behaves can have been influenced by early life experience. So if you've had experienced traumatic events in your childhood, that may mean that your stress response currently as an adult is somewhat maladaptive. And so that may influence whether you just resign or withdraw rather than, rise to a challenge. And that's something very personal and something that would be good to work with a professional on, because you can work on changing that maladaptive response to an adaptive response. So, it's a complex issue. I hope that kind of touches on answering some of that.
Are there any further questions? If not, then I say, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the only one I can see in the.
Yeah. Well, then we are letting people have a pause now, so they can.
Yes. Get some fresh air, air, daylight. Really important. It reinvigorates you. I, on the other hand, am going to sit down.
Yes, do that, Sabina. Yeah, thanks for your wonderful talk again, and thanks for everyone joining. Have a good day. Enjoy. Laugh a lot. Go to sleep early, and yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.